Week in the Woods, Day 1. Preparations. Mr. Maxwell looked at the long list, and then looked at the calendar, and then he shook his head. It was February 13th, and he was sitting at his desk in his classroom at 6:45 on a Friday morning, and a question formed in his mind. Why on earth do I do this year after year? He quickly pushed that thought out of his head and turned back to the checklist. It had become a tradition at Hardy Elementary School, bright and early on the Monday morning of the third week in April. The whole fifth grade piled into 3 buses and went off for a week in the woods. And that's what the program was called, A Week in the Woods. It was a nature studies, and it was environmental science, and it was campfires and creative writing and storytelling and woodcraft. It was always the last big event for the fifth graders before they went on to middle school. It was always fun, always memorable, and the person who always made it happen was Mr. Maxwell, the fifth grade science teacher. The kids looked forward to a week in the woods. They all loved it. The fifth grade teachers also looked forward to a week in the woods, but not all of them loved it, not even most of them. In fact, there was a rumor that if Mr. Maxwell ever moved or retired, the program might change. It might become a day in the woods. And at this year's early planning meeting, Mrs. Leghorn had been heard muttering, "This is Whitson, New Hampshire, for Pete's sake. Every week is a week in the woods." Mrs. Leghorn was the fifth grade math teacher, and if she got her way, the program would become an hour in the woods, without me. But Mr. Maxwell had originated the program, and this would be his 16th year as its director. As always, he wanted the fifth graders to have an outdoors experience that they would remember all their lives. So once again, it was going to be a week in the woods. Bill Maxwell was a big man. He cut and split his own firewood, and he had the shoulders and arms to prove it. He always wore dress pants and a white shirt and tie to school, and that helped make him look less rugged and a little less imposing. But it was fair to say that Mr. Maxwell had never had a discipline problem in any of his classes, ever. At 45 years old, his thick brown hair was starting to turn gray, but apart from that, he looked like a man 10 years younger. He wasn't handsome, but he had a pleasant face, open and honest, with clear blue eyes and a strong jawline. He had grown up in northern New Hampshire and had majored in environmental studies at the State University. Then, at the end of his junior year, he took part in an Earth Day event at a grade school. That's when Bill Maxwell discovered that he loved to teach almost as much as he loved the outdoors. He shifted his major to education, and 1 month after graduation, he landed a job in Whitson as a fifth grade science teacher. Bill and his colleague, Sweetheart, had planned to get married, but after she graduated, she took a job as an accountant for a big paper company. The marriage never happened. Young Bill Maxwell could not understand how anyone could work for an industry that did such bad things to the environment. During his next 3 years of teaching, Mr. Maxwell lived in a boarding house in the nearby town of Altonborough. During the summers, he painted houses and he saved every penny. Then he bought 45 acres of wooded land about 50 miles north of Whitson and built himself a log house. He installed solar panels on the roof and built a small generator system that made electricity from the stream that tumbled across his property. Before his winter set in, he figured out how to make a catalytic converter that would reduce the pollution in the smoke from his wood stove. Mr. Maxwell's younger sister didn't like the idea of his living all alone out in the woods. She worked for the New Hampshire Humane Society, so over the years she had made sure that her big brother always had at least one dog to share his home with. Mr. Maxwell's mother had more specific ideas. She wanted him to get married and have some children. But whenever she told him that, Mr. Maxwell would smile and say, "Mom, remember, I've got children. About 150 of them every year." In 5 mornings a week, 9 months a year, Bill Maxwell drove the quiet country roads from his home to Hardy Elementary School so he could spend the day with his children. The drive in his old blue pickup truck took him an hour in each direction, and more in bad weather, but Mr. Maxwell wouldn't have had it any other way. Sitting at his desk on the morning of February 13th, the program was still 8 weeks away. Growing up, Bill Maxwell had been a Boy Scout, then an Explorer Scout, and finally an Eagle Scout. He took his Scout motto seriously: be prepared. That's why Mr. Maxwell's preparations for a week in the woods had started back before Thanksgiving. He had already signed up 18 parent volunteers to help with the baggage handling, the cooking, and the chaperoning. He'd driven over to the campground at Gray's Notch State Park on a Saturday, and then tramped around in the snow to check out the newest cabins and do a careful bunk count. He'd signed a contract with a Native American man, a panoptic storyteller, who was going to give an evening performance that would include some history about the Abenaka and the Pennacook tribes. He had even worked out the menu for each of the 13 meals and the 4 evening snacks at the park, and had already placed the order for the food deliveries. Plus, he'd taken care of about a dozen other details, not to mention writing and revising and assembling the big information packet. He'd have the packet ready to hand out to each 5th grader the day after Christmas vacation, because that had become a tradition too. True, a lot of the preparations had been completed by February 13th, but the checklist went on and on, so Mr. Maxwell scooted his chair up closer to his desk and got to work. Before the morning buses arrived, he'd written a letter to the New Hampshire Fish and Wildlife Service, replied to an email from the State Park Ranger Service, and laid out the schedule of events for day 3 of A Week in the Woods. As his homeroom kids began streaming through the doorway, Mr. Maxwell made 3 more neat little marks on his checklist, and then put it away in his file drawer until after school. It had been a productive morning. That same Friday morning, some other preparations were just ending. About 270 miles south and west of Whitson, New Hampshire, something was happening. It was something that was going to have an impact on this year's Week in the Woods, but it wasn't on Mr. Maxwell's long checklist. There was no way for him to be prepared, not for this. Mr. Maxwell had no idea what kind of trouble was coming his way, but trouble was definitely headed north. Leaving. Mark Robert Chelmsley watched from a 3rd-floor window as Leon and Anya packed the last few boxes into the trunk of the long black car. This is so stupid, he thought. It's not like we're really moving. We're just leaving. Which was true. The large brick house in Scarsdale, New York hadn't been sold. Everything was staying just as it was. All the furnishing, all the electronics and appliances, even the china and the silverware, all staying put. Mark's parents had decided it would be good to have a place so close to New York City, so they were going to keep the house. And the new house? Simple. The new house was already remodeled and redecorated and completely furnished, everything brand spanking new, except for the antiques. This move? There'll be nothing to it. That's what Mark's mom had said, and his dad had nodded and said, "Piece of cake." Easy for them to say, thought Mark. They're not even here, which was also true. Mark's parents, Robert and Eloise Chelmsley, were running a stockholders meeting in San Francisco. Friday, February 13th, his dad had said with a shrug. We'd promised we'd be there, and there's nothing we can do about it, Mark. It wasn't that Robert Chelmsley didn't care about his son's feelings, because he did. He cared deeply. He could see Mark was upset, but he also thought Mark was old enough now to understand that business is business and a promise is a promise. Plus, he had the nagging fear that Mark wasn't learning to be tough enough to handle the enormous wealth and responsibility he would inherit one day. With another shrug, he said, "These schedules get set a full year in advance, Mark. One-shot deal. And the people who own 65% of the company have to be there, and that's your mom and me. That's why Leon and Anya have been left in charge of the move." Mark's mom always told everyone that Leon was their handyman, and she said that Anya was her housekeeper. Mark knew better. Leon and Anya were babysitters for him. The Russian couple had been hired 5 years ago, and since then his parents had been free to travel as much as they needed to, which was almost all the time. Once it was clear there was nothing he could do to stop the move, Mark had declared that he wanted to take everything, all his stuff. He didn't want a new room in a new house. He wanted things to be the same bed, same desk, same bookcases, curtains, and carpets, everything. Mark's dad had shouted, "That's ridiculous." But his mom had patted her husband's arm and said to Mark, "Dear, I don't think that'll be a problem. That'll be just fine." Then to her husband she said, "Don't you think that'll be all right, Robert?" Nodding slowly and smiling ruefully, Mark's dad said, "Sure. Didn't mean to yell about it. Whatever's going to make everyone comfortable is fine with me." So Mark had spent his last week in Scarsdale sleeping in one of the 3rd-floor guest suites, and a team of professional movers had disassembled Mark's room. They took everything. And now it was time to actually leave. All Mark and Anya and Leon needed to take were 2 computers, 4 or 5 boxes of food, and some clothes. Anya called from the front hallway, "Mark, please come down now. It's time to go." Mark called back, "In a second," but he didn't move. Mark's face felt hot, and he swallowed to fight the lumpy feeling in his throat. He had lived here for almost 3 years, and he'd made a couple of good friends at Lawton Country Day School. He'd grown a couple of inches and had added some muscle to his wiry frame. Now he was leaving right in the middle of 5th grade. Next year he'd probably have made it on the 6th grade lacrosse team, maybe the soccer team too, except it had already been decided that he would finish out 5th grade at a public school near the new house in New Hampshire. And then next year, he was going to start 6th grade at Runyon Academy in New Hampshire. Might as well be on the moon, thought Mark. Mark had been all over this before. Like, why move now, in the middle of February, with less than half of 5th grade left? His dad had said, "Simple. I just bought a company up there near Lebanon, and I want to get the family moved in before the end of the first quarter. There'll be some nice tax breaks if we establish residency in New Hampshire." His mom had quickly said, "It's not that, sweetheart. You'll have just gotten back from the February vacation, and we've arranged to have the new house ready then, and February is going to be the most convenient time for everyone. That's all. You can make a nice clean break with your old school, and it'll give you a chance to settle into the area before you go off to summer camp." Settle into the area, thought Mark. Right. Like some hick village is going to be my home sweet home. Once I start at Running Academy, I won't even be there for more than a couple of weeks a year. Mark had already checked the map by then. The new house was more than 60 miles north of Runyon Academy, much too far for driving to school and back every day. So from 6th grade on, Mark would have to be a boarding student. That had already been decided too. "It'll be good for you, Mark. I know it was good for me. It'll help toughen you up a little." That's what his dad had said about boarding school. There hadn't been any discussion about that, or about anything, not with him, because when it came to Mark Robert Chemsley and his future, things weren't discussed. They were decided. It was Leon calling him this time. "Mark, come, please. Snow is starting, and it's a long way. It is time now." Mark didn't answer. He had no reason to hurry. He walked slowly down the front staircase to the 2nd floor and into his empty room. Bare walls, bare hardwood floor, empty closet. He went to the window that faced the backyard and raised the shade for a last look. He pulled in a deep breath through his nose, trying to imprint the smell of this room, this house, these years, trying to burn it into his memory. They had been pretty good years, and he wanted to remember everything exactly. But he knew he wouldn't. In a year or so, he wouldn't remember this home any better than he remembered the house in Santa Fe, or the big apartment in Paris, or the brownstone in Manhattan. As he turned to leave, something on the floor caught his eye. It was a penny. He picked it up and looked at the date. Same year as he was born. He thought, a lucky penny. Then he laughed at himself for thinking something so stupid. Right, because all the lucky kids get to leave a great school and all their friends and go live out in the middle of nowhere. Mark pulled his arm back to toss the penny into his empty closet, then stopped. He walked slowly around the edge of the room. He paused next to the tall iron radiator on the other window, or by the other window, and pushed. It rocked just enough. Out loud, he said, "This'll do." His voice sounded hollow in the empty room. He pushed again, slid the penny under the front right leg of the radiator, then let it settle back. The penny was completely hidden. It's like a time capsule, he thought, proof that Mark Chelmsley lived the best 3 years of his life right here. Then Mark ran out of his room and down the front staircase. He pulled the heavy front door shut with a thump, trotted over to where Leon waited for him, and jumped into the back seat of the Mercedes. Leon shut Mark's door, then climbed into the driver's side, fastened his seatbelt, and started the engine. Anya turned around in her seat to smile at Mark, but she knew better than to say anything. She knew what it was to leave things behind. As the car swung the wide arc of the brick driveway and then turned onto the road, Mark did not look back. Next stop, New Hampshire. Chapter 3. Not the same. Anya shook him gently. "Mark, we're here." Mark sat up in the back seat and looked around groggy and confused. Then he climbed out, but he didn't follow Anya toward the door on the far side of the garage. Instead, he walked to the back of the car. He stood on the concrete just inside the garage, blinking as his eyes adjusted to the late afternoon light. Looking around, Mark thought maybe they'd driven to a different planet. The storm had promised 1 inch of snow for his old home, had dropped 8 inches onto his new one. His eyes followed the deep tire tracks in the new snow. The twin ribbons marked the narrow roadway that stretched across the field and into a distant stand of pines. Closer to the house, the driveway ran between two fenced pastures, and every 15 feet or so, a pair of tall sticks had been stuck in the ground on either side to help drivers when the snow got deep, like today. The snow had been plowed up high on both sides of the road, evidence of previous snowstorms. Looking to his right, Mark saw the front of the original house. The realtor's brochure had said the old part of the house had been finished in 1798. The new part had been finished about 2 weeks ago. 5 new bedrooms, 4 new bathrooms, a big family room, a full office suite, an exercise room, an indoor lap pool, and a 3-car garage, plus a separate living area for Leon and Anya. The new part of the house was almost 3 times larger than the original, but it didn't look that way. Except for the garage, the additions had been built onto the back of the house and extended downward along the slope of the land. The only way to see the true size of the place was to walk all the way around it. A gust of wind swirled some powdery snow down from the roof of the garage. Mark shivered, and as if she'd seen him, Anya stuck her head out the mudroom door and called, "Too cold, Mark. Come get your coat and hat." Mark stood staring at the snow another minute or two, then turned and walked slowly across the polished concrete floor to the back door. When he came into the kitchen, Anya said, "I'm going to make us a quick supper. Your coat is in the in the closet there behind you. Back inside in 15 minutes, okay?" Mark said, "I'm not going out," and turned away from her to look around the room. Like the house, the kitchen was part old and part new. On the old side, Leon had already built a fire. The huge fireplace was like a little room made of stone and mortar. Mark could have walked all the way into it. There was even a small granite bench built into one side of it. A heavy copper pot hung from an iron hook above the andirons, a reminder that this fireplace had once been the center of the kitchen. Mark went out through a low doorway and wandered through the dining room, then a study, and a small sitting room. The ceilings were low and the walls were painted in deep greens and blues. There were old-fashioned chairs and tables, with braided rugs covering the wide floorboards. All the lamps had bulbs shaped like candle flames. Everything tilted, floors, walls, and ceilings, and the rooms felt cramped and dark. The small windows didn't let in much light. Mark studied the thick shutters to the right and left of each window. They weren't like the shutters in their family room in Scarsdale. These shutters were solid wood, with broad iron hinges and sturdy latches. They weren't there to look nice or to give a little privacy. These shutters had been made to keep things out. The old living room had another huge fireplace, though not as deep as the one in the kitchen. This one was made of brick with a broad wooden mantel. Mark went to the tall cabinet built into the wall on the left side of the fireplace and pulled the door open. He'd read about this cupboard in the brochure that the real estate lady had sent to his parents. It was a firewood bin, almost empty at the moment. Mark pushed on the back of the cupboard, and the panel swung inward, just as the brochure had said it would. In the dim light, Mark could see the narrow staircase. It led up to a secret room, and people believed it had been used to shelter runaway slaves on the Underground Railroad. Leaning forward and looking up into the gloom, Mark thought, plenty of time to explore tomorrow. That was true, but Mark knew the real reason he didn't climb over the logs and go up the stairs. He didn't like to be alone in the dark. Mark pulled the panel shut, closed the cupboard door, and moved on. The new part of the house didn't impress Mark. Sure, everything was gorgeous. Every rug, every antique, every painting. Sure, everything was designed perfectly, from the octagonal sunroom to the home theater installation to the pink granite lap pool. Spacious rooms, beautiful materials, rich furnishings. But Mark knew how easy it had been for his parents to write the big checks. He knew how easy it had been for his mom to pick the best architects and designers and decorators, and since Mark knew that, it all seemed ordinary to him. Except for the views, Mark had no defense against the beauty of nature. The house was perched in the middle of a large upland meadow with stunning views in every direction. The architect had made sure that each oversized window was placed for maximum impact. At the landing on the staircase leading up to the bedrooms, Mark stopped to stare into the distance. The sky was clearing from west to east, and where there had been solid gray 20 minutes ago, now streaks of pink and gold spread along the undersides of the cloud. The dark pines along the ridge, the tracery of leafless birch and maple trees, the rocky outcroppings, everything stood out in sharp relief against the blazing sky, and off to the east the White Mountains lived up to their name. Standing still, Mark drew in a deep breath as if to taste the air, and he wished he had gone outside instead. Supper time! Mark pulled his eyes away, the spell broken. Coming! Tomato soup, grilled ham and cheese, peeled carrot sticks with ranch dip, chocolate milk, and fresh apple pie with vanilla ice cream. Anya knew all Mark's favorites, and she'd made sure to have them on hand for his first meal at his new home. Leon took a loud sip of soup from a mug, then wiped at his mustache with a napkin. So, he said, what do you think of the place? Pretty great, eh? Mark shrugged. Yeah. Leon had kept it a secret that he loved the whole idea of moving north. Mark's father had sent him up to the new house twice in the past month. Leon needed to learn all about the water system, the backup electrical generator, and the security system. The house even had its own water tower and sprinkler system because the nearest fire department was over 10 miles away. Leon gestured over his shoulder. The mountains. You saw them? Mark nodded. Uh-huh. Leon winked at Anya. The White Mountains are not so nice as the Ural Mountains, but they'll do, don't you think? But I'm not happy about the soil here. Bad, very bad. Mark took another bite of his sandwich. He didn't know that much about Leon and Anya, but he knew that they had lived in central Russia before coming to America. Anya had taught at a nursery school, and Leon had worked on a potato farm. In Scarsdale, Leon had taken over part of the side yard and planted a garden. From June to October, he and Anya had enjoyed a steady harvest of homegrown vegetables.